Good evening, everyone. Uh, Thank you very much for inviting me for this particular session. I'm quite excited, and it's quite a privilege to be part of this series. Uh, as Aarti kind of like explained, I'm just going to go through my entire journey since I basically participated at MMCA and then went on, like to become urban designer and urban planner, and where I am today. I'm just going to talk about that entire journey. So, first, in my presentation, I'll talk about what kind of like education I took, and then I'm going to talk about my work experiences in general in last 10, 15 years. And then I'll also talk about some of my recent projects. And as Aarti mentioned, although I have a bachelor's degree in architecture, most of my work experience has been in the field of urban design and urban planning. So it's quite interesting how I transformed myself from being an architect to urban designer and urban planner. And I thought it might be a good idea to share that experience with all of you. So to begin with, I have this photograph of our college right here. My 5 years in architecture were quite exciting, and I must say that the steps that you see here, we spent a lot of time here on these steps talking about architecture for all the 5 years that we were there. My memories about spending time at MMCA were really continuous explorations about architecture. We had really great teachers, and I still remember each one of them, and the kind of education they gave us is really lifelong, and we are really using that education even today. But one of the most important assets for me being at MMCA was really the friendships that I made. And I always feel that the education that you take from your teachers is like really important, but at the same time the friendships that you make are really like lifelong. So I have a photo here on the screen with three of my really best friends, and the reason I'm sharing that photo is like uh, two of them are my business partners even today. So we like came together after going to like different parts of the world to establish our firm, Green Space Alliance. So that foundation was like really laid at MMCA. Another thing that I really remember about my time at college is we did these extensive travels in India. So every year during the summer holidays, we would go to different parts of India and do those sorts of like backpacking trips. And in those 5 years, we almost like travel all over India. And that experience, I think, it was really valuable in establishing that strong like architectural foundation when we were studying architecture. And one thing I must say that it's one thing about like learning academic kind of like knowledge when you're at school, but just having your eyes open and experiencing those aspects of architecture and urban design was really critical. Moving on, so when I was taking architectural education, I had no idea that I might end up as urban designer and urban planner. But when I completed architecture, I truly felt that I have understood the built aspects of architecture, but at the same time, I need to understand a bit more about how buildings fit in the surrounding context and so forth. And I was fortunate enough to kind of get accepted at CEPT Ahmedabad. So I moved there. I spent approximately like 1.5, 2 years in Ahmedabad. And the way we studied architecture in Pune and then transforming into the urban design kind of like field was quite a shift. And CEPT is a really unique like institute. I really felt that that's the institute that taught me the overall critical thinking in design in general. At the same time, it really made my foundations of like urban design like really strong. And it's an institute. It's I mean, although we spent like 5 years in architecture, like really close together with friends and teachers at MMCA, CEPT was really at a completely different level. It was like 24/7 discussions about like urban design with people from all over India. So I think that experience was really unique, and I'm sure like CEPT must be like very similar even today. So any of you, if you want to take like higher education, I would highly recommend you to do like masters in institutes like outside your city. I think I know like Pune even has like lots of like architectural institutions right now, but that whole aspect of like getting out of your own city and learning these things in a completely different environment was quite unique. When I did like diploma in urban design from CEPT, I I, I I did thesis in again. I chose a topic called like Central Business District in Susan Marunge, which is near Pune, because Pune is my hometown. I grew up in Pune, and that kind of like experience it really brought me back to Pune. I'm just mentioning the kind of like topics I chose in my thesis, just to give you a perspective that I started with architecture, but then went on discussing those broader aspects in urban design. From there, in 2001, end of 2001, when I finished urban design diploma, I realized that I have traveled extensively in India. I understand, how architecture works, how urban design works, but somehow deep within, I felt I need to understand how the city planning works in general, and where exactly all those architectural decisions that we take, how are they influenced by? They're influenced by those broader decisions, but at the same time, how the zoning bylaws are written, how municipal policy planning happens. So, with that desire, I decided to take education abroad, and I was fortunate enough to be part of like McGill University in Montreal, Canada. And before I like moved to Canada, I had no idea about the culture and the way the city planning happens in the Western world. So McGill University is quite unique. You can see this photograph here. It's located in downtown Montreal. Just being at McGill was quite unique because the setting. I truly felt that if you're learning urban planning, where you learn is quite important, because by being in downtown like Montreal and experiencing the way the urban life works there really influenced my overall journey of becoming an urban planner. Uh, it's also a unique city in Canada because it has a very strong European feel. There is a fine blend between French and English culture in Montreal. At the same time, the quality of life in Montreal is quite different. And I must stress this fact because the amount of open spaces, parks, bike infrastructure, pathways, all those aspects that somehow when we grow up in India, we never like really, I mean, at least I had never understood the importance of those aspects, in improving the overall quality of life. But when I first landed in Montreal, those things came to like really forefront, and they really how much they contribute to the overall quality of life became like quite evident. And I realized that they are not happening by chance. In fact, there are like urban planners and designers who are working day in and day out to make those systems better, to improve the quality of life of all citizens. So that whole aspect of municipal planning and management became like quite evident to me, and I kind of like decided then to follow that field in bit more detail. And as I was doing like masters, I deliberately chose a completely different topic for my studies. So again, my background was, as you all know, like architecture, urban design. I thought, let's understand how really big projects work, how they're financed, and so forth. So I spent like significant amount of time in understanding how metro projects are actually financed in the Indian context. So I did a lot of like research in project financing and so forth. So slowly I was like drifting away from the architectural like side of things, but still architecture is has always been the first passion. So that's how I kind of like I don't know moved from architecture to urban design and urban planning. And after I completed my master's of urban planning, I moved to another like really unique city in Canada, Toronto. It's quite a multicultural city and almost like financial hub of Canada. This is where I worked in private sector in a firm called Urban Strategies. I worked there for a couple of years from 2004 to 2006. This is where I worked on a number of urban design plans in and like near Toronto. I also worked on two university master plans for University of Ottawa and Brock University. This is where, again, I combined like architectural and urban design kind of like expertise. And then also worked on some planning approval projects, like in the Toronto area. So that was like a lot of experience in private sector, working with like clients, private sector clients in coming up with urban design solutions. But I felt that probably in Canadian context, to really understand how municipalities work, it might be beneficial for me if I work in the municipal sector. And I don't know, how many students in Indian context take the route of like working for a municipality. But I strongly feel that it is extremely important because you can work in a private sector for developers, for architects, and so forth. But ultimately, if you are thinking about building cities, the role of municipal planners and designers and architects even is quite critical. And it has played a very important role in my career in understanding that sort of things. So in 2006, I moved to Western Canada. So just for your reference, I thought having this map would be quite helpful. So first, when I moved to this province of Quebec, which is in Eastern Canada, and Montreal is located somewhere here, quite in the south of Canada. Canada is like a really cold country. You might be aware of this. Most of the bigger cities are at the south edge of the border. So I was first in Montreal, then I moved further south to Toronto, which is near New York. And then I made the move of like going further west to Alberta in Western Canada, to the city called Edmonton, right here. It's quite at the north end of Alberta. And it's interesting, just to give you a perspective, it's quite cold in winters. The temperatures go sometimes as low as minus 30, minus 40 degrees Celsius. So it's quite cold. In summers, it goes, this summer we had like plus 30, plus 35 degrees. So the range of temperature change is quite drastic. But it's quite a unique place because we have a variety of different natural kind of like expressions. We have Rocky Mountains here and really rich natural environment with the boreal forest, as we call it. Winters are like quite harsh, but they can be like really beautiful. At the same time, we have vast prairie lands, which is without any mountains, and extensive farmland. So the diversity of the natural landscape is quite unique in Alberta. So when I moved to Edmonton, this is a city of approximately 1 million population. So compared to Pune, which I'm assuming is around like 4 to 5 million population, is comparatively a smaller city. But for Canadian context, it is, I would say, medium or even like large city. The total population of Canada right now is like 30 to 35 million people, which is not that high. And that's really the unique aspect of Canada. The population is quite low, and the quality of life, in my opinion, is quite high. And Edmonton is a really emerging city in Western Canada right now. A lot of things are happening here. So that's why when I moved here, there were like a lot of like unique opportunities. I took a position as a principal urban designer with the city of Edmonton. And I always just say this fact to anyone, like my friends in India and so forth, that one of the critical things I learned is, although it's a city of like 1 million, I did a quick search about like the number of urban designers and number of urban planners actually work for the municipality itself. There were like when I joined approximately 300, 400 planners and urban designers working for the municipality, trying to make a city a better place. So I was just thinking like in a city like Pune, where we are a city of like 5 million people, uh, how many people are actually working for the municipality? Yes, there may be like many people working in the private sector, but it's a completely different ball game when uh, people, like with like master's degrees and PhDs are actually working for the municipality, and it becomes a completely different dynamic where when good projects are proposed, you have someone like equally qualified on the other side, trying to engage with you to even improve the quality of life in that city. When I was working as a principal urban designer, my role was basically reviewing various development applications when they come from developers and architects, and providing them those that urban design guidance so that they can take that project to the next level. Yes, we were part of the approval authority, but it was quite a engaging process to negotiate with the developers. Although there is a zoning bylaw and various policy documents, when projects happen on one-on-one basis, there is quite a bit of negotiation involved. One of the things that as architectural students, I would like to stress that in Indian context, we have floor area ratio or floor space index. It's a flat FSI or FAR, as we call it, throughout the city or maybe different parts of the city. The way it works in the Canadian context is we have fixed FARs based on the zoning, but it can be negotiated depending upon the merit of the project, and that's where like really your architectural knowledge, urban design knowledge, and urban planning knowledge can come together. And I was able to offer that to a number of projects here. So I worked with the city of Edmonton for approximately 4 years, from 2006 to 2010, and most of my experience was really working in the downtown context and quite urban context, even if it was approving some suburban neighborhood development plans and so forth. At that time, I thought that probably it might be interesting to understand how the rural planning works, because although we all live in cities, rural planning, in my opinion, is quite a important field in developing our I don't know, cities and countryside at the same time. So I took a job as a senior planner with Strathcona County, which is a rural municipality close to Edmonton. I didn't spend a lot of time there, but it was quite a window into how rural like planning works. Uh, when I was working there, I was uh, responsible for the long range planning of that municipality. And what it means is how the municipality will be growing in the long run. So there is a specific position for that. And that's where we came up with multiple policy level documents. I was initially involved with the growth plan. And then I also worked on they had like a couple of like rural hamlets. So we worked on what's called area structure plans for those hamlets. So again, coming up with the land use plans at a broader level, so that in the future, when the development is happening, it's guided by those land use planning documents. After doing that that experience in the public sector working for the municipality, I shifted to like private sector and started working as a consultant. So I led uh, a Edmonton office of a firm called Planning Alliance. That firm at that time was based in Toronto, and so I led their Edmonton office. And this is where, like really, although I had like lots of experience working in the urban context, we took a number of rural like planning projects involving what we call as municipal development plans, which is, I think, in Indian context, I think it's called like development plans. We created like multiple municipal development plans here for a number of like rural municipalities in Alberta and Saskatchewan, which is a adjacent province, and also like Manitoba. So we did those at the same time. I personally always wanted to work on land use bylaws or zoning bylaws, because as an architect, I always felt that who are actually the people creating various rules about how much should be the setback and what should be the height of buildings, and all those rules that we as architects like follow when we are developing those buildings. I was actually involved in writing multiple bylaws, and how that whole process works from a planning perspective about like what are those objectives at the planning level, then what are the objectives at the urban design level that you want to achieve, and then to implement that, we are creating those zoning regulations so that they can be implemented by architects. So I did that for almost like 4 years. And around like 2015, I again worked with some of my like really good friends from MMCA. We used to call MMCA, not MMCOA. So I'm going to call it MMCA. And we created this firm called like Green Space Alliance. So my partners right now are Dheeraj Patil, who is based in Pune. In fact, our office is quite close to MMCA, just behind on Jungli. I think, yeah, just behind MMCA is our Pune office. And my other friend, Amol Deshpande, he's based in US. He's a landscape architect. So my background is in urban design, urban planning. Dheeraj has also done urban planning from Chinese University of Hong Kong. So we three of us, we came together and we created this brand called Green Space Alliance. And so now we are doing a number of projects in India. In India, we are mostly like working on large scale landscape architecture projects and urban like planning projects. Dheeraj is leading that. Amol is doing like projects in the US in the field of like landscape architecture, and he's also involved in projects in India. And I'm mostly doing urban design and urban planning projects in Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. So that's how we kind of like evolved as a group. Right now, in terms of the staff, we have approximately like 20 plus staff in our Pune office. in our Canada office has like 6 staff, and we have people again, like with the backgrounds of like architecture, urban design, and urban planning. And Aarti has asked me to talk about how we are working in terms of like diversity and inclusion. I must say that like our offices have now people from a variety of like backgrounds, and also like not just like personal backgrounds, but also like professional backgrounds. To create like really unique architecture or urban design, you need like people with different disciplines. And unless you have that, like creating something unique is quite difficult. That's my personal belief. So most of the staff here in Edmonton office, they have that urban planning background, but their bachelor's degrees are in like variety of like professions. So some of like have engineering background, some have urban geography background, and so forth. So all of these diverse peoples have come together to really come up with some unique design solutions, I must say. So at this point, I thought it might be a good idea to provide a really high-level overview to all of you about the way the planning framework works in Alberta, because some of the projects that I'm going to share with you, they are mostly like urban design and planning projects. But I thought just giving you that quick overview might be valuable. So the way the planning framework works, it might be very similar, like to the way things work in Indian context, but the way it's implemented, in my opinion, it's quite different. So we have Alberta, which at the provincial level, Alberta's land use planning framework. Then in Edmonton, which is one of the metropolitan cities, we have Edmonton Metropolitan Region like growth plan. So it's not just the city's development plan, but it's at the regional level. There is this understanding that collaboration is necessary between cities in the capital region. Then what we call is intermunicipal development plans. I haven't seen those in the Indian context a lot, but I may be wrong. But when different municipalities are next to each other, what happens in the fringe areas is defined by something called intermunicipal development plans here, GSA, and I was really fortunate enough in working on number of intermunicipal development plans in the last 5 years. At the same time, those intermunicipal development plans, those are like really negotiations between the two or more municipalities about what can happen in their municipal fringe areas. And then there are like municipal development plans developed by individual kind of like municipalities. I had a chance to work on Edmonton's municipal development plan 10 years ago when I was working at the city of Edmonton. And recently, through Green Space Alliance, we were involved in the public engagement aspect of Edmonton's municipal development plan. And then it's really unique, which in my opinion does not exist in the Indian context, is what we call as area structure plans. It's quite important because what I have seen, the way it happens in probably in the Indian context is it feels to me as it's a lot of like developer led like planning process where like if you own a piece of land in a municipality, you you are almost like leading the development. Yes, there is a development plan at the city level, but the developers are leading like what might happen on their piece of land, and infrastructure is kind of like followed or infrastructure is built by developers as it moves. The way it works in Edmonton context or Alberta context is a lot of time and effort is actually spent by the municipality to come up with what we call as area structure plan for the new developing areas. Some area structure plans even take like 3 to 5 years. So it's a really long and slow process where a lot of like public engagement happens, and we go through that process, and that plan is created with a collaborative effort with developers. Many times, those plans are paid by and developed by developers, so the private sector, but they go through a very rigorous process of municipal approvals. And once that plan is approved, then that plan also talks about how infrastructure can be extended to those new areas. And then the development happens, and the development hardly happens by jump starting the infrastructure availability. And last but not the least, once you have like those area structure plans developed, then there is a zoning bylaw, and the zoning bylaw, which is really important for our architects to implement, is created either on a side-by-side basis, or like there are like specific zones for specific areas in the municipality, and it gets implemented. And one thing I would like to stress, that the way the negotiations happen in this part of the world is, if you disagree with what happens, what's designated for your land, you can always rezone your land to do something else that you want. And that's where the role of a planner becomes quite evident. And that's where you can actually use your architectural and design knowledge to rezone a particular piece of land to do something completely different. And that's where the whole negotiations happen between the private sector and public sector. So as you can see in this diagram here, the triangle is inverted. At the higher level, you have like less detail, and as you go like down the pyramid, the detail about like what you can do and cannot do with your property keeps increasing. But at the same time, the process is quite aligned. So every time like you want to change a particular plan, you have to make sure that you are aligned with the broader objectives in the plan or the policy that is above like your level. And then you either align with your project with that policy, and if it's not in alignment, you can always apply for amending the plan itself. That process is available, and that's where planners' role come into picture. So just diving a bit more deep, at Green Space Alliance in Edmonton, we are working on a number of interesting projects, either like with private sector, or like with public sector. We are like taking projects with private sector to do land development approvals, rezoning projects, undertaking like subdivision and development approvals for clients. At the same time, we are working on a number of developing municipal development plans for rural municipalities, developing land use bylaws, developing strategic plans and open space plans, also like coming up with like downtown plans, creating design guidelines for like municipalities, developing architectural controls, and developing outdoor open space design. So because of our background, we can take like a wide range of projects. And I must say that when we started, like you can be expert in everything, but the way the planning field works, in my opinion, it just opens up like opportunities. It's all about like talking with people, understanding their perspectives. And as an architect, like you have this notion about like creating like unique creation for every project. But the way our current practice works in urban design and urban planning, I would say that it's not about coming up with something unique with every project, but coming up with something that almost like you facilitate what aspirations are for different stakeholders. And you have to almost like work as a project manager. You bring in like different disciplines in and make sure that people get what they want, so that ultimately you're improving the quality of life for them and in that particular municipality. So today I'm going to talk about 4 different projects that we have worked on in Edmonton. There are like 2 projects in Edmonton, and then 1 project, like we worked for a small town called Town of Slave Lake, We developed their downtown plan. We developed their urban design handbook. So I thought I should provide a quick overview about those projects, just to give you a sense how planning and urban design happens in this part of the world. The first project is Alberta Avenue neighborhood renewal. So as you can see in this aerial photograph on the right-hand side, Alberta Avenue is one of the neighborhoods in Edmonton. It's a quite low-density neighborhood. You can see it here in this image. Most of the houses are like single-family like homes with like a grid pattern, like street network. Lots of like mature trees. There is a commercial main street at the center of this neighborhood. Approximate population of like this neighborhood like might be like 7 to 10,000 people. So in the city of Edmonton, this is one of the older neighborhoods. City of Edmonton is approximately 100 years old city, so not like very old city, quite young city. But Alberta Avenue is probably like 60 to 70-year-old kind of like neighborhood. And so a lot of like infrastructure here, sidewalks, open spaces, is quite old to Edmonton's context. So what the city of Edmonton is doing now is they have allocated a certain percentage of tax dollars to go in 3 or 4 neighborhoods every year and upgrade all the infrastructure. So when it comes to like the sidewalks, street lights, even the way the traffic infrastructure happens in terms of your curb extensions, traffic calming mechanisms, and the quality of like open spaces and so forth. All of that, they go in each neighborhood and completely change everything brand new. So they're doing that for a city of like 1 million. They're going into 3 to 5 neighborhoods each year, and that's happening for last 15, 20 years. So it's one of the unique programs in North America, and quite unique in terms of like making sure that you keep on like revitalizing older parts of your cities. So 3 years ago, they decided that before they undertake, this is quite a engineering-led project, but before they do that, they thought that there is a really strong value in undertaking a strong urban design analysis before you go in, so that they would engage urban designers and urban planners like ourselves to go in the neighborhood and analyze the neighborhood from a urban perspective and come up with a strategy about what exactly needs to be done. So Green Space Alliance was one of the lead consultants hired by the city to undertake that comprehensive urban design analysis. You can see in this map, this is the neighborhood boundary. We did a comprehensive context analysis to understand where the key destinations are in the surrounding area, where are like different open spaces, and so forth. What are the key transportation routes going through the neighborhood, and how can we improve that connectivity to the surrounding neighborhoods? So that comprehensive analysis was done right in the beginning. At the same time, we came up with a urban design framework for the neighborhood. And when we came up with that urban design framework, we came up with the build like 4 different themes. The first one is parks and open spaces. Quite obvious, all these green spaces are all existing green spaces in the neighborhood. We talked about the walking infrastructure when it comes to what happens near school sites, how people move through the neighborhood. Can something be done in terms of like widening the sidewalks or improving the overall pedestrian comfort for pedestrians? How the driving happens, is there like shortcutting happening through the neighborhood? How people move, like from other neighborhoods, but like they're crossing through the neighborhood. Is there a need for creating some sort of traffic calming, so that again improving that pedestrian comfort? Biking, which is again the kind of like bike infrastructure is located in the neighborhood, what can be done to improve that infrastructure or put new bike facilities within the neighborhood. It's quite amazing right now in Edmonton. The city council has decided to put dedicated bike lanes all around and just providing that flexibility for citizens to take public transit, also use like bikes to go to work or to recreate in your city. So we undertook that entire analysis and we came up with like 15 to 20 specific like urban design projects. And that framework was then provided to the city team, which then are actually implementing, like all this. So this study was done 3 years ago, and this neighborhood will be completely reconstructed in the 4 year time period. Uh, the budget for this entire infrastructure improvement is around, I think, if I'm not wrong, 60 to 70 million dollars. So a huge a dollar amount is going to go in this neighborhood to improve the overall quality of life. As I was talking about improving the bike infrastructure, we came up with a strategy about how that infrastructure should be improved. So, coming up with dedicated bike lanes, as you can see here, separated bike lanes, sometimes, like creating bike lanes by in terms of like shared street kind of like facility. So, variety of like different like bike infrastructure facilities will be installed in this neighborhood to improve that connectivity. At the same time, like we are also proposing some placemaking kind of like initiatives. There was a small like commercial area within this neighborhood, and we came up with a design to create a kind of like wider urban plaza with parking, with improved like public realm. So as you can see, like a lot of things that I'm talking about from an architectural perspective, they might not be groundbreaking, but that's where the whole question comes, and that's what I want to like really stress the fact. Sometimes it's not about like really creating kind of like unique and earth-shattering architecture to make the place a really unique place and a place that really is really comfortable for citizens. Sometimes it's really about making sure that you have really nice sidewalk to walk on. You have trees everywhere. You have like park spaces in close proximity to where you live. You can walk to your schools and you can walk to your commercial areas and so forth, and how all that works really contributes to the overall quality of life. Architecture, yes, it plays like really important role, but in the big picture, it might be just creating like some landmarks at some locations. But overall, like if we do the basics right, when it comes to urban design and urban planning, you're really creating that unique city that you all strive for. That's one of the biggest lessons I have learned, like by living in Edmonton and the Canadian context. We don't see like a lot of like unique architectural elements everywhere, but overall, the way the design works, it really helps in creating a livable like cities. The second project that I want to talk about is Edmonton's Chinatown. And the name of the project itself is Chinatown Urban Interface Plan. This is how Edmonton's Chinatown looks like. It's located quite next to downtown Edmonton, and it's quite a struggling area right now. It's area in transition. There is a lot of like low income like population that lives in this area. A lot of like transitional folks, so quite a tough neighborhood. And the city of Edmonton wanted to transform this area into a vibrant place right next to the downtown. So almost like 5 to 6 years ago, they hired another firm to undertake economic development plan for this area. And that economic development plan came up with four key unique kind of like directions. The first was developing a focused, again, economic development area for Chinatown. The second strategy was developing or celebrating Chinatown as a destination. Third kind of like strategy that the economic development plan came up with was how can you enhance the built form landscape, landmarks, and open spaces within Chinatown. And last one was improving the sense of safety and security. So those were like really high level kind of like directions when it comes to economic development. And what we were charged to do with at Green Space Alliance was how can we take a look at these four economic development objectives and come up with placemaking strategies to achieve that in Edmonton's Chinatown. So we did extensive brainstorming sessions with municipal staff and key stakeholders in the Chinatown area. And as you can see here, all these bullet points that I have highlighted, we came up with a variety of like placemaking strategies. And for something like this, we developed a diagram like this. This is based on Michigan State University. They had established this whole like criteria for like placemaking. They talk about how placemaking can be done in terms of like strategic placemaking, creative placemaking, and tactical placemaking. So they have a really interesting document, almost like 600-page document that talks about how this placemaking can be implemented. So we really took that framework and tried to apply that framework in Edmonton context. And really, the end result is to how can we apply these techniques to create something to improve the quality of life at the ground level. So what we did, like in this project, again, at a planning level, is we tried to define what urban interface means for Chinatown in this diagram and how it relates with all the surrounding neighborhoods in Edmonton. How can we improve that overall connectivity? And at the same time, how the interface happens in terms of like public realm and private realm. So we really worked at both those levels. And you can see in this illustration, because the Chinatown is located quite next to downtown, we came up with one of the first like strategies was how can we create a mixed use environment and how can we bring people to live in Chinatown so that in the end, they can actually provide that land use mix in this area. There were like the vision talked about like coming up with like lots of like high-rise residential towers in Chinatown. How can we make the main street like right here quite vibrant at that ground level, like commercial, which is quite unique to like Chinese culture. And at the same time, we also created a very robust kind of strategy for like open spaces and coming up with like open spaces that are like culturally like sensitive, but at the same time, we came up with a strategy to have that public-private partnership so that some of the open spaces might not be owned by the municipality, but they can be developed as part of like private sector developments and they can make it available to people to use as open spaces. In Edmonton, we have a unique land use class called privately owned but publicly accessible open spaces. And what that really does is you don't have actually publicly owned parks and open spaces everywhere, especially in the urban context. But when the redevelopment happens on private sector land, the developer would be required to dedicate or make portion of their land available for public utilization. So they still own that land, but they'll be required to design it in a way that when people are moving next to that street, that space is accessible to everyone, and it's designed in a way that it really contributes positively to the urban fabric. So we came up, like with that strategy and variety of like open spaces and how they can work with each other. And last but not the least, this whole urban interface plan um, came up with like 13 different like placemaking projects as they're identified in this image, and they ranged from this sort of like main street public realm improvements to open space improvements to very tactical, like kind of interventions such as, like just, for example, this one 97th Street, just having, different light elements that reflect the Chinese colors, having some traditional Chinese lamps on these streets, which again can be implemented through the business association that is active in the area, and this whole interaction happening between public and private sector to implement these placemaking efforts. I must say that most of the projects that we work on, they are kind of like long-term strategies. So these strategies are applicable for next 5 to 10 years. So we came up with this strategy. Right now, this particular neighborhood is going through neighborhood renewal, as I talked about in Alberta Avenue neighborhood renewal. So some of these initiatives that we talked about will be implemented as the neighborhood renewal happens. So it's quite satisfying that at the urban planning level, you can come up with a high level strategy, and in like 5 to 10 years, many of those initiatives get implemented. But they don't get implemented 100% exactly the way we had envisioned them, because the most important thing is you are trying to create a framework, and that framework then gets implemented. Uh, the high level principle is kept intact, but the way it gets implemented might vary. But that's the whole point in urban planning and urban design. If your framework is like really strong, and if it gets implemented in slightly different way, it's all good. Because you're still getting that open space connectivity, that street network, and public-private interface kind of like implemented. That's the second project. The third project that I'm going to talk about is the town of Slave Lake downtown plan and urban design handbook. So around like again 4 years ago, we were hired by this municipality. It's a small municipality. It's a town located approximately 2 hours north of city of Edmonton. It has a huge like lakefront, and it's surrounded by this very thick boreal forest, as we call it. Um, Quite unique setting. In I think 7 or 8 years ago, there were like huge wildfires, and majority of the town was actually completely burnt. And they went through a massive redevelopment effort. And after that effort was done, they hired Green Space Alliance to develop a downtown plan for their town. So we went there as urban design and urban planning experts. We worked with their municipal administration. We worked with their business community, residents in general, to come up with a downtown plan that would guide the future development of that town for the next 10, 15 years. All these projects that I talked about, they're all available online. So if you want to see uh, those projects and the reports that we created, you can always do that. Uh, but again, we applied like the similar, like placemaking framework that I talked about, because that's quite important to our work at Green Space Alliance. And we, you can see on the right hand side, we came up with a sketch plan. We worked extensively like with stakeholders to get their buy-in, which is extremely important in the Canadian context. We're not going in, and working directly with developers and coming up with visions. If the is the vision supported by a variety of like stakeholders living in the municipality. It's quite important. If it's not supported, the plans don't go forward. So we came up with a plan like this. I'm not going to go like too much detail into what the plan was, but I just wanted to give you a quick sense about what aspects like we talked about. I have like another illustration right here. This particular town, this is their downtown, which is quite a linear downtown. And I don't have it in this illustration, but you have a provincial highway like right here at this end. And the lake that I was talking about is somewhere over here. And the downtown and Main Street is kind of like connector between the highway and the lake. And the Main Street happens in between. And it's quite a transition from this sort of like auto-oriented developments to a commercial Main Street, and then goes to the industrial area, and then the lakefront. One of the key things that we found was lacking is the pedestrian connectivity and the overall wayfinding between the downtown and the lake itself. So one of the key catalyst projects, as we talked about, was how can we connect our downtown to the lake itself. And so that strategy was created like 3 years ago. And I must say that like last year, the town received some stimulus funding from the province to, because of COVID situation, to implement some of the urban infrastructure projects. And this exact initiative that we had identified to improve connectivity of the downtown to the lake, developing a trail network, was considered as one of the projects that they want to implement. So it is going to become a reality probably next year or so. Another interesting, like initiative that we had identified as part of the urban design initiatives was at the center of the town, like right here at this location in the downtown core. We proposed that there should be a central plaza that needs to be developed so that the town can have all those annual celebrations, whether it's Canada Day, like festivities, or any other like festivals that are happening. They can happen in that central kind of like green space or a plaza space. So that initiative was identified. Even that initiative is going to get implemented, like this year and next year. In fact, like Green Space Alliance was also involved in coming up with a vision for that like downtown plaza. So it's quite satisfying that you work on these long-term plans, and then 3 years, 4 years from now, you have created a framework, and that framework is supported by municipal council. That framework is supported by citizens and the business owners. And as the funding becomes available, these initiatives get like implemented. So we also talked about like how to strengthen this Main Street, and we also worked on their land use bylaw to update their commercial land use districts, and to make sure that how the commercial development in downtown can actually complement the commercial development that's happening on the highway corridor. Because in this town there was this real challenge of when the commercial development on the highway started happening, it started competing, like with the downtown, and the vitalization of the downtown became quite a challenge. So we came up with a framework to say that what sort of like uses might be allowed in the downtown, and what sort of like uses should be allowed or not allowed along your highway, so that you can actually achieve that downtown revitalization by almost like forcing certain uses, such as like for example doctors' clinics or government like offices, or like ground level like small scale like restaurants. They only become allowed in your like downtown core. And if you want to do them along a highway corridor, they don't become like permitted uses, but they become like discretionary uses. So this is one project, like where Green Space Alliance was able to work on high level like policy document. We worked on their like land use bylaw. We worked on their urban design guidelines, and we are also working on developing a plaza design. So really at a variety of like scales for last 4 or 5 years. As I said, we were also fortunate enough to develop high-level urban design guidelines. So for this town, and this is where the architectural knowledge really comes into picture. When we worked with the business community and the local community, we had a 1 day long like brainstorming session about like how we want to create the overall theme for this town. We explored like variety of like ideas, and we came up with this branding of like creating like we called it like nature unlimited theme, because this town is located right next to a vast lake. It's almost like a sea. When you're actually there on the ground, you can't see the horizon. It's quite huge and quite unique, uh, and it's right in the middle of the forest. So the overall opportunities in terms of like recreation in the nature are kind of like limitless. So we came up with this theme of like nature unlimited for the downtown and the town as a whole. And for the downtown, for like future like development that might happen, we almost like came up with a architectural palette about the kind of like materials that the new development should be using, the kind of like color palettes that individual developments can incorporate. And we also like came up with this whole direction for the developments are not going to be like massive developments. It might be like small scale like infill projects and so forth. And how can they like really imbibe that unique like signage, natural colors, and like small scale aspect and resort style kind of like ambience to any new project. So we came up with a detailed set of like guidelines. All those guidelines were documented in a document called Downtown and Main Street Urban Design Handbook. At the same time, we provided a detailed direction for like various urban plazas that might happen in this town. So that whole framework was created, uh, and this slide really talks about just zooming in at the urban design scale about like how that streetscape and the plaza design it can happen. So right now we are working with the town to establish a detailed design for this triangular plaza right in the heart of the downtown. And again, we're trying to create this inclusive space which can be flexible enough that can host like variety of like events for people in downtown and also the regional population, because for this town it's not only the town but all the surrounding rural municipalities. They come here for like shopping and recreation. So we really wanted to create a very flexible space that can host like farmers markets and all other festivals. So this design is near completion right now, and the possibilities that this will get implemented fairly soon in next year or so. And I'm now coming to my one of my last slides, developing like land use bylaws. We were quite like fortunate enough to work on almost like 10 plus like land use bylaws in Alberta. Many of them are for rural municipalities, so like counties, incorporating like thousands of like hectares of lands and a lot of like agricultural context. Today, I thought, like I had once done a presentation actually in Pune, like almost like 8 years ago, where I had talked about Lac St. Anne County's land use bylaw that we had developed. Again, the context is quite different. We talk about like how agricultural subdivisions should happen in rural municipalities. At the same time, we worked with towns and villages in coming up with their land use framework. This is where I was really able to apply the architectural knowledge and understanding how when architects are designing their buildings and spaces, what aspects are really critical, like in developing like unique buildings, but at the same time, buildings that fit with the urban context. They might not be like architecturally completely like different buildings, but how really those buildings contribute to either rural context or urban context. And that experience has been like quite valuable in coming up with these like land use like bylaws and overall frameworks. So I guess this is really like my experience about working as urban designer and urban planner in the Canadian context. To conclude, I must say that the architectural education I took in Pune really provided me a strong foundation to explore those broader aspects of like urban systems. And if I have to give like any advice to you as architectural students, I must say that uh, during your like 5 years of like college time, really use this time to explore your own passion, to understand what aspects of like architecture and design you really like. And once you know that, then this field is like really broad. It doesn't have to end up with architecture. Uh, there are like so many aspects. I mean, I took this urban design and urban planning kind of like perspective and went ahead with that. There is like real estate development, there is project management. There's so many aspects that you can choose and really have fun with it as you move forward in your career. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and looking forward to your questions.
Yes, that was a wonderful presentation, Dnyanesh. So here we go with the questions. There's a question from Sudarshan Bodhankar. Indian cities identify public spaces with names of citizens of city. For example, Karvenagar, Shivaji Putara, Jangli Maharaj Road, Dnyaneshwar Chowk, etc. So do you agree that such a theme could be proposed in your designs in terms of some public space or roads? The places seems to be named numerically, for example, 105 Avenue and so on.
Let's say, and Sudarshan, so I know Sudarshan very well. Sudarshan was my batchmate at 1999 batch. So good to see you there, Sudarshan. I think to answer your question, I have two answers actually. In Edmonton, what we have done is they have this numerical system for like roads. We have 101 Avenue, 101 Street, and so forth. So the entire city is like named when it comes to streets using numerical names, which really helps when it comes to orienting yourself in the city because it's predominantly a grid iron pattern. But when it comes to the suburban neighborhoods, we have a combination of numerical names and also specific names, as you mentioned. Cities in India definitely have like unique history of like hundreds and even like sometimes thousands of years if we're talking about like really old cities. So we have that privilege of having that history and heritage so that we can have, like these historical names. But one, like key thing that I was part of, like when I was at the city of Edmonton and the way it works, for all new developments in the city of Edmonton and in general, bigger municipalities in Canada, there is what is called naming committee. So we have at the city of Edmonton a naming committee, which is headed by a planner, and there is a small staff of like 4 or 5 people working in the municipality. So every time there is a new subdivision or a new development that is proposed, what happens is what should be the naming system for the roads, not so much as buildings, but no, like different parks and roads a developer has to make an application to the city to propose like specific names. At the same time, at the city staff like goes through like historic analysis, and there is a proper process kind of like highlighted, and negotiations happen, and they go through that system, and it is presented at the naming committee, and they come up with what naming system should happen. And once that research is done, then the final names are kind of like finalized. So it's really not 100% like led by the development industry, which I find is like quite unique. It goes through a very rigorous like process to come up with like new names, and linking that to whatever historical aspect that they can tie back to, and it becomes a collective effort to name like new developments. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. There is just a request. Can you stop sharing your presentation so then we can. Okay. There's another question by Sachin Vaman. Hi Dnyanesh, hope you still remember me. So good to see architects successfully working as planners. As per my understanding, planning process is mostly a 2D exercise in Indian context. But architects and urban designers working as planners actually bring in third dimension through their visualization of space making capabilities. My question is how in Indian context we can bring in an integrated approach between planners, urban designers and architects for developer-driven projects for a comprehensive place-making approach.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. And yes, I remember Sachin too. I think he was from 2000 batch, I think, one year junior to us. So I definitely remember you. When I think about how urban design and urban planning can be implemented in the Indian context, and especially the integrating that third dimension, what I feel is, I mean, we were like fortunate enough at Green Space Alliance to work on Amaravati's urban design framework like a few years ago. So my partner Dheeraj Patil was leading that exercise. What I have found is we have at the planning level, the development plan is done, which is, yes, it is a two-dimensional kind of like exercise. And when it comes to like developers implementing, like those plans, I think what needs to like really happen is at the urban design scale, like planners and designers can come together. And what is like really lacking, in my opinion, and that might be my perspective, is how a particular development really fits with the surrounding context. I see like lots of like renderings when developers are kind of like selling, like their development projects, especially at the architectural level. You have like lots of like towers happening. And then when you look at that rendering, even the way the marketing brochures are done, outside, like just at the edge of that particular project, you see like all the green fields, because that's how, like it's happening probably right now. But the way the development should happen in reality is, again, that whole notion of like, instead of like jump starting development and instead of like multiple people developing at the same time, planners definitely have a role. And I don't know how that is implemented like politically in the Indian context. But if you have like strong development plans, the way it's done in the Western Canadian context is you have like all these long-term plans done. But if someone wants to go like and jumpstart the development and develop somewhere in the extreme like remote area just because they have funds and they can make it happen, the municipalities are quite resistant in terms of like approving that development. And there is also a like requirement of making sure that infrastructure is developed first and the municipal infrastructure is extended, rather than people like developing just on-site infrastructure for their own like developments. So my real question here, like answer here is, yes, you can do all the three-dimensional integrations and you can do like all sorts of things that can be done at the planning level and at the urban design level. But the way the development happens itself needs to be it needs to change, like in a way to make sure that it is quite integrated with urban context and development actually follows, like the anticipated development pattern that is envisioned at the planning level. If we can like really achieve that, and I really don't have an answer because it seems like everything is happening in a quite dynamic manner in the Indian context, which makes it like quite difficult to implement certain planning level aspirations, I guess.
There's a question by Tane Ambaone. How do you perceive the difference between the bylaws in Canada as against Indian bylaws for urban interventions?
Yeah, so I think, I have reviewed some of the zoning bylaws that are applicable in India, but I think the way bylaws work, it seems like they're quite flexible, they're quite stringent, like in Indian context where they define like I think like the heights and FAR and the setbacks and those like regulations, and there is a separate profession I hear, like in architecture, of what they call like licensing, where there are like architects working on it, but separate architects getting these things approved, like from municipalities. But when you're working, as an architect, I'm assuming that there is not a lot of like negotiation like involved. But the way it works in Canadian context is we come up with like these land use bylaws. We have like development regulations. We also have like permitted and discretionary uses in these zoning bylaws. But at the same time, when an architect makes an application, architect can say that, well, like we are trying to create like XYZ project. The city has these regulations in their zoning bylaw. The FAR might be X or FSI might be X. The setbacks might be, like X, Y, Z. But what we want to create does not align with your zoning bylaw. So we want to change the regulations in the zoning, and that whole mechanism is available in the Canadian context, and that's what we do as urban planners. I work with a lot of like developers here who hire architects to do their buildings, but at the same time they hire us as urban planners, and we represent them. We take the application to the city. And we tell them that yes, this is what our architects want to create. It's not in alignment with your zoning bylaw, or maybe like 80% of the things is in alignment, but 20% maybe we want like more FAR, or we want to change the side setback. And then we have to like provide a very strong what we call as planning rationale why we are changing like those regulations. When we are trying to change those zoning regulations, we have to go through extensive public engagement. So the way it works is we make the application to the city, then the city notifies surrounding landowners and say that, hey, there is an application here for a development and they want to change certain regulations. How would they impact you? At the same time, and then everyone gets an opportunity to provide their input. We hold kind of like public engagement sessions, and we try to explain the community that we are changing these regulations, but in return, we might be providing something else. So a good example is we worked on a project. We are working on a project right now. In the current zoning, only like a two-story building is allowed, but that particular area had an area structure plan that was developed like 10 years ago because it was right next to a LRT station or a metro line. And that plan talked about like allowing four-story buildings. So you had like the existing zoning that allows like two-story buildings. The future plan for the area talks about allowing like four-story buildings. And we came up with a development application, and we said that to make sure that this project becomes viable, we might have to like improve lots of like water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, and so forth. So instead of like 4-story buildings, we are proposing a 6-story building. That project is going on for last almost like 1.5 years, where we are engaging with the community, we are engaging with municipal planners, we are engaging with municipal council, and we are making a planning a case of why at this location a 6-story building makes sense, how we are treating various setbacks and regulations. So we created a site-specific zoning for that particular site, and we will like get that approved at the municipal council. Once it gets approved, the zoning for that site will change. We call it like site-specific zoning amendment, and once it's implemented, like the developer can do that. At the same time, I mean, like Green Space Alliance is working for private sector doing these kind of like rezoning like applications. It's one of the important aspects of our practice here. But last year, the city of Edmonton also hired us to update their entire zoning bylaw as key like planning advisors like to do that. So it is quite a interesting opportunity where we are working with the private sector to understand their challenges working with the zoning bylaw. But at the same time, we're also working with the city to provide them advice about what challenges developers are facing and what can be done at the municipal level to make sure that the zoning bylaw is streamlined in the first place. So again, that's where we can apply our planning and urban design and architectural knowledge at the same time.
There's a question. What would you suggest to the new generation in terms of opportunities in Canada?
So I must say that especially if you're coming like from India, the opportunities in Canada are like really limitless, I must say. Generally, a lot of people who come from India or even like South Asia, they come to bigger cities. There are like 5 or 6 big cities in Canada. It's not like US. So you have Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa in the eastern Canada. You have Winnipeg in Manitoba. You have Saskatchewan and Regina in Saskatchewan. Saskatoon and Regina in Saskatchewan. Edmonton and Calgary in Alberta, and Vancouver in British Columbia. Those are really 6 or 7 big cities in Canada. And in these big cities, yes, there is a huge need for like architects, urban designers, and urban planners. And then if you go to some of the smaller municipalities, the opportunities are even bigger. The climate is one of the challenging aspects, but if you're okay with the cold, then the opportunities are limitless. I must say that it's a really unique place with amazing like nature, I must say, and recreational opportunities. So if you like that lifestyle, it's really nice.
There's another question by Parag Vishwas Rao. Hi Dnyanesh, great projects. You have spoken about place making. Can you briefly talk about place keeping?
Say it again, please.
He wants to ask, briefly talk about place keeping.
Place keeping, okay. Oh, hello, hello Parag. I definitely remember you, of course. So I'm understanding the question is place keeping. This term is kind of like new to me, I must say. Can you please elaborate what do you mean by place keeping?
I think he has not mentioned. It's not mentioned. Maybe we can take up another question till he writes and elaborate on.
Sure, no problem. Okay.
What is the biggest challenge in the field at the moment in this pandemic? I would like to know that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's quite interesting when the pandemic happened. most of the city of Edmonton, and most of our clients, like everyone started working from home. And when it comes to municipalities, though, and the municipal work that we do in urban planning, we were not like directly impacted by that, like right away, because like the kind of like work that we do is really the long-term like planning work, and there is still a lot of like long-term planning work happening in Canada. So we were still involved in reading those municipal development plans and land use bylaws and so forth. Our work with respect to like private sector like slowed down a bit, but right now it's like picking up again. In Canada, like most of the country is now like vaccinated with the second dose. So we were like quite aggressive, and things are kind of like coming back to normal. Probably from next month in Alberta and Canada in general, most of the people will be going back to work in person. So that transition, like it's kind of like happening. But when it comes to like urban like spaces and urban living in general, uh, what I have found like personally, that there is a real shift in terms of like where people live, because 1 year and 1.5 year is like quite a long time for people to try work and live like remotely and still be able to do that work. So that's going to significantly shift, I think, the way like municipalities are developed and the way people live. I mean, we do like a lot of work with rural municipalities, and I'm going to see like a lot of like shift in people from urban areas, like choosing to live in suburban environments, and also like choosing to live in small towns and villages, especially in the Canadian context, because with the internet availability and the quality of life is everything here. So if you can live on a bigger piece of land, close to nature, and able to do like same amount of like work, then that's going to be like the real choice for Canadians at least. And I'm sure that that must be the case in Indian context to a certain extent. So although I mean, uh, urban context and urban living is important, I think worldwide, you're definitely going to see that shift in terms of like rural living. So we are really looking forward to um, working with like smaller municipalities and like making sure that they have like plans in place to make sure that they're improving the quality of life for that shift, which is already happening. So again, that's my answer when it comes to how I see the impact of pandemic on overall urban development and our practice in general.
Okay, Parag has replied. Placecaping, it is a very new concept in Australia. After placemaking projects, it is often found challenging to keep these places sane and to them functioning as envisaged. I hope it makes sense to you.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. I think I must say that I am a personal believer that, again, because of like this, my shift from architecture to design and urban planning, some things, like might not be like really groundbreaking in terms of design, but the success of like any like public place really depends upon how it is managed over the period of time. Again, as urban designers, we are creating that framework, making sure that we are not excluding any end users from that space when we create that framework as urban designers. So the way it works in Canadian context, for example, when we are working on these neighborhood renewal projects, for example, Alberta Avenue neighborhood renewal that I talked about, that's why who owns that space is like really important. In the city of Edmonton, we are very clear about is the place actually owned by city of Edmonton. So Most of the park spaces that we work as part of like neighborhood renewal projects, they are completely owned by City of Edmonton, and they are responsible for ongoing maintenance of that space. So there is that explicit understanding that those places will be maintained by City of Edmonton staff. So when we are designing those spaces, we have to follow the city's strict guidelines for operational maintenance. So they go through like extensive circulation in terms of like snow removal, ongoing maintenance of like benches, like lights and so forth. I mean, I worked on like another project like recently in another neighborhood renewal, which had a kind of a main street environment. And that main street did not have a business improvement area organization in place. So we had to engage with the local business owners, and there was a separate agreement that is in place to provide ongoing maintenance of that streetscape. So cities like quite strict on like making sure that those agreements are in place so that the business owners are responsible for removing the snow in front of like their properties and maintaining the day-to-day maintenance of that space. In addition to that, we had proposed uh, some temporary festive lighting. So there was another agreement in place to make sure that the electricity bill for that is paid by business owners. In addition to that, like we have like various business areas. In those business areas, there are like separate agreement if there is like any small scale kind of like ongoing kind of like beautification, such as like flower pots or banners. Like if they need to happen, then the city has another agreement so that business owners take that responsibility. So the way it works is either like certain aspects are done by municipality in terms of like ongoing maintenance, and if it is beyond the municipal scope, then they are like quite strict in engaging business owners and adjoining property owners to have those agreements in place so that the ongoing maintenance is kind of like done. If we are talking about suburban development, so we and it might be the same in Australia, where when the development happens, the developer is responsible for dedicating approximately 10% of their land as what we call as municipal reserve. That municipal reserve is dedicated to the municipality, and then what happens on that land is decided through public engagement, where citizens can say that we want a park space, maybe we want a playground, or we want a certain sports field, whatever they want. It gets concluded, and then the municipality uh, is responsible for ongoing maintenance. If it's happening on the school land through school reserve, then there is a separate joint agreement with the school board, and they're responsible for like maintaining like those spaces. So really, I think that whole implementation aspect is like quite important, and we as urban designers also like get involved in creating those agreements. Another like very interesting topic is public art. So like right now in the city of Edmonton, there is a policy called Person for Art. So the way it works is like if there is a new public project being implemented, 1% of the construction budget has to be dedicated for installing public art, which sometimes becomes in hundreds of thousands of dollars for big infrastructure projects. And what we have a committee called Public Art Council. So that Public Art Council then decides what kind of like public art should go in. Again, it goes through a public engagement process. And once the public art is installed, then the Art Council is responsible for lifetime maintenance of that public art. If there's a vandalism or just ongoing maintenance, so they're responsible for it. So it's really important that you have these sorts of agreements in place. In addition to that, programming is also like important part, and that's where how your civic infrastructure is really critical. So in Edmonton, for different neighborhoods, we have what we call as community leagues. These are really local bodies made up of like local citizens, and they come up with like different programs. for the open spaces that are in their neighborhoods. In addition to that, if something is coming in, let's say downtown, that downtown has a downtown business association. So they organize a variety of like programs in the open spaces that are there in the downtown areas. And so that's the body that's responsible for organizing different events, whether it's farmers markets or different festivals and so forth. So there's always a different organization, whether it's a government organization or non-government organization. They get their separate funding to organize those events, and it gets implemented. So really, this whole process of like city building does not stop at design. The way it gets implemented is through like huge collaborative effort between different stakeholders, and that's the beauty of it. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes. Any practical advice you would like to give to our students as an alumni?
Well, again, when you say like practical, I must say that keep your eyes open. Again, what I said in my slide, architectural education is just going to give you a like a way of life and way of thinking. It's not necessary that you have to practice as architects, but that knowledge is definitely going to help you in variety of ways, whatever like ultimate and the profession you choose. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you so much, Dnyanesh, for this wonderful presentation. I would request Principal Dr. Ujjwala Persule ma'am to please address the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Aarti ma'am. Good evening, Dnyanesh. It was a very intense and very detailed presentation. Thank you very much for sharing your in-depth experience working as an urban designer in a different country altogether. And I remember attending your presentation 10 years back, and I could see, you have been consistently working in this field, and you have come a long way. And I have been getting the updates of your work from architect Girish Doshi sir, who also happens to be our design chair. And I'm very happy that you have presented your work today for our students, and they could really understand how this work happens in different continents. I thank all our alumni, our faculty members, students, non-teaching staff for attending this session. I thank our team of International Webinar who has been tirelessly working on this event. I also thank Marathwada Mitra Mandal's management for their support. Thank you, Dnyanesh, again for taking time out from your busy schedule. And I wish you all the best for your future endeavors. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you.